Hi, this is Kim Siebold. I wanted to talk to you about oral history and its uses in family history, local history. Actually, oral history can be used in any type of history. Um, it does a nice job of giving you a first-hand account of stories, issues, events, that sort of thing. Um, and I encourage you, if you haven't done any oral interviews, to actually do some. But anyway, let's get started. So, what is it? Um, there's a great book out there by Catherine Studevant called "Bringing Your Family History to Life Through Social History." I may have mentioned this before, and she has a great chapter on oral history and its uses. Um, but this is one quote that I pulled out of that. She says, "The oral historian knows that an interview's treasure trove is not the trivia of who, when, or where, but the what, why, and how of family and local tradition." And I think basically what she's saying is it is important to know who, when, or where, but to give it context, you have to know the what, why, and how. And oral history is a tool that could get you into the what, why, and how of family and local tradition. Oral history captures an individual's spoken memory, and we've already talked a little bit about the issues of memory, and we'll talk about that a little later on again. It's democratic because it allows us to access memories of people from all social classes. And you can see that if you go online and you punch in oral history projects or oral history, there's many different websites out there that have oral histories that are recorded that you can listen to or have been transcribed, and you can read the transcriptions. Probably one of the earliest oral history projects was the slave narratives, which were done in the 1930s as part of the Works Progress Administration. So they would have been interviewing people who had been slaves, and they would have been, let's see, if they'd been born in 1850, so they would have been in their 80s by then. So anyway, it gives history kind of more of this leveling or equality sense to it, because it allows us to access the history of people from all classes. Plus, it allows you to get the to the heart of the matter of people who didn't leave behind documents, right? If somebody didn't leave behind any letters or diaries or anything like that, if you talk to their family members, you might get more of a feel for the person through oral history. And it's here that gives texture to history, and in doing so, it provides context. The problems with oral history. Is oral history fact, perception, or both? And and what's wrong with fact, what's wrong with perception, what's wrong with both? I mean, if you rely on oral history as a fact, if you interview somebody and they say that the sky was blue uh, on December the 21st for 15 hours of the day, which December 21st is the shortest day of the year, that would be a fact in their mind, but again, it's their memory. So you have to start thinking about, well, how true is this, right? You have to weigh things, because sometimes people get their facts mixed up. And memory is not always reliable. And you have to think about what also affects memory. Um, Age will affect memory. Uh, the how see how personal or how tragic the event was could affect memory. Um, there are there there are many different things. How close was the person to the event when it occurred, or how close was the person to the person you're talking about? Um, those kinds of things. I guess an example of memory and what affects memory is when I was 13, my mother left us, and it just kind of happened right out of the blue. I mean, one day we woke up and she wasn't there anymore, and anyway, I remember, it's so weird. I remember bits and pieces. I mean, I was 13, so I was old enough to remember things. I can remember something as clear as this. Um, that day that she left, my sister and I had been at home all day by ourselves. And my father came home from work, and we had called to see, if she was at her friend's house or whatever, and we couldn't find her. So I remember my father taking us out to dinner for pizza, which was something that he rarely ever did. I remember that very well. And I remember coming home, and my sister and I, all excited because we were home in time to watch our favorite TV show, which was the Wild Wild West. Um, and I remember my grandparents showing up. My mom had left letters with them to tell us that she was leaving and all this other kind of stuff. So I can remember that clearly. I mean, I can remember having the discussion with my sister about what TV show we were watching. I can't tell you what day it was. I found out years later that it was August the 25th, but at that point I didn't know what day it was, the date. I didn't remember the date. And I know that we had to change schools because we no longer had a way to get to the school bus for where we were going to school. And I remember that we had been going to a private school, and then we switched to another private school, but we only stayed there. I don't know how long we stayed there. It wasn't very long. But I remember going, and I remember then going into a public school. But, I can't remember those time frames. Like, how long was it that we were at that school, that second school? And I can't remember when it was in the fall semester that we went to the public school. So it's kind of weird what your memory will remember, and what you can remember and what you can't. So that's why I say I think memory is affected by how personal something was, as well. Well, that's probably more information than you need to know about me, but I think it's a good example of just how reliable is memory, how far from the event that you're talking about can also be a factor. Does perception have historical value? Now, what's the difference between fact and perception? A person's perception, they may think it's fact, but you as the outsider see it as perception. So, for example, this is a perception example that really doesn't have anything to do with oral history, but it's a good example of perception. I did my dissertation on the salt marshes along the Gulf of Maine, and part of the dissertation looked at the agricultural uses of that landscape because they drained the salt marshes and they diked them, and then they worked to create them into regular fields so that they could grow regular crops on them. And the reason they did this was because salt marshes were highly, highly fertile. So there's this history, this 100-year history of people working on those salt marshes and altering that landscape. But in the late 19th century, the late 1800s, the early 1900s, there's this movement across the United States that kind of starts to romanticize nature, and this is especially true in areas around urban centers. So, right outside of Boston, the salt marshes outside of Boston, in places like Newburyport and Ipswich, or you go into Hampton Beach in New Hampshire, or you can move up the coast into Maine, Scarborough being the largest salt marsh collection in Maine, and people started perceiving those salt marshes as being pristine examples of nature. They were places that people should go to enjoy nature and revitalize themselves from the pollution and the busyness of major urban centers. And it's kind of seen in paintings. There's this one painter, Tom, oh, shoot, can't think of his first name. It's, yeah, sorry. Heed is his last name, Heade. And he paints these kind of idyllic landscapes of the salt marsh. Sarah Orne Jewett and other writers write stories set in the salt marshes, and they talk about these marshes as being kind of these ideal, pristine places of nature that have never been, corrupted by human beings. So that's their perception of this landscape. And I think that perception develops because here you have, by that point in time, the farmers are pretty much done using the salt marshes. They realize that it's not as lucrative as they would have liked it to have been. And the other thing is Boston and other urban areas are growing, and the middle and the upper classes are looking places for like a weekend jaunt or getaway to a place that seems, more natural, less urban, the air is purer, that sort of stuff. So they look at these salt marshes and they think, oh, well, yeah, let's go to the beach. Let's enjoy hunting out on these marshes, or even walking. I mean, you have to get the tides right, but you can go out there and enjoy nature that way. And so this is the perception. It's not to them, it's a fact. It's a fact in their minds that they think that this salt marsh is an example of pristine nature. Compared to living in inner city Boston, it would be an example of pristine nature, right? But the reality is that it's not. It's something that's been used over time, that had been altered by human beings. So what I'm trying to get at here is this perception. In their minds, it was a fact, but it's a perception. So my dissertation looks at these perceptions of these salt marshes, as well as the actual agricultural uses of those salt marshes. I hope that makes sense about the difference between perception. When a person takes something as fact and you know that it's not, then that's their perception of it. Even if some of it is partly true, it's still their perception of it. So, you want to ask yourself, why do they have this perception? And that's why I said, does perception have historical value? So you want to figure out what is the concept that is causing them, what is the context that is causing them to perceive what they're perceiving as fact, right? And so for those people who are perceiving the salt marshes as pristine nature, right, the context is, well, where do they live? They're living in Boston. It's much more urban and polluted and all that, right? So you want to look, so the perception has just as much of historical value as the real fact does, because you're looking at what is it that's making people think the way they're thinking, all right? So you have to put everything into their context. Again, we've talked about context. You have to look through the layers of society, culture, family, and the individual. Did those farmers and the descendants of those farmers of the salt marshes in the late 1800s, early 1900s, know that those marshes had been worked and they weren't pristine nature? Yeah, they knew that, right? They don't have that false perception of them being pristine nature. So then again, you have to ask yourself, okay, what was the context of these artists and writers who are gravitating towards these marshes and painting them or talking about them as pristine nature? I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please let me know. But the whole point of this is, even if a person is telling you about an event and their basis of the event is not clear or is wrong to some extent, then the question to you is, what has caused them to have this perception of the event in this manner. All right, so think about this, the complexity of oral history. Departure from the fact is fact. Wrong statements are psychologically true. So what the heck does that mean? And again, this is going back to that whole idea of perception. If a person has altered the fact in their mind, again, you want to know why have they altered that fact. You always want to like compare the facts that are coming out of oral history with other facts that you may find in newspapers and things like that to kind of create a bigger picture, and to also get a handle on how factual was the person that you were interviewing. Can you hold on 1 minute while I go scold my dog? Hold on. Hold on. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. Here we go again. All right, so the complexity of oral history. So again, the departure from the fact is still fact. Wrong statements are psychologically true. In other words, you can't, if a person tells you a story about an event and their facts are wrong, it doesn't mean that you have to throw out that oral history as useless. What it means is that you have to analyze why they got that event wrong. Okay? For example, there's this great story. There's a book that I like to use when I teach an oral history class. It's a book by James Hoopes, Hoopes. It's called Oral History. And in it, he tells this great story about these people going out and interviewing these farmers in the South. And one of the questions they asked this elderly gentleman is, do you like the Ku Klux Klan? Now, first of all, the first problem with that question is it's a yes or no answer question. And when you do oral history, you never want to ask a yes or no question. You always want to ask a question that provokes an answer. So a better answer would have been, what do you think of the Ku Klux Klan? But the question that they asked was, do you like the Ku Klux Klan? And the farmer said yes. No, excuse me, wait a minute. The farmer said no. I'm sorry. The farmer said no. So the interviewers assumed that he was not racist, that he didn't like the politics of the Klan, he didn't like the racial ideas of the Klan, all that sort of stuff. And so they go back, they go home, they transcribe it and everything, and then, they realize that they've kind of asked this yes or no question, and they're making these assumptions, and they go back to interview him again, and they probe a little deeper, and what they find out was the man had no real problem with the politics of the Klan or the racial ideals of the Klan. He was just mad because the Klan came into his farmyard, his field out away from the house. They had nothing to do with him. They just used his field to burn a cross one night, and in the process of doing it, they cut his barbed wire, and his cows got loose. So you have to really dig into to what's going on. So keep in mind that you have to understand that oral history is complex. You can't just take it as face value. You have to continually dig to make sure that you understand the complete context of what is being said. Oral history is never the same thing twice, and that's very true. If you interview someone who you don't know, they might be guarded. But if you go back and you interview them again and again and again, not necessarily asking the same questions, but just following up on things and when you do transcribe the information, if you know that you need more detail, you might find that the person, as you go and meet with the person more, the person will be more open. There's also a reverse to that, and I experienced that. I wanted to interview my father and record his memories. And the moment I brought the tape recorder out, he wouldn't talk. Now, this is a man who never was at any loss for words. But when I brought the tape recorder out, that was the end of it. Couldn't get him to to say anything. So, you know, it kind of goes both ways. Oral history deals with the problem of memory, which is human and fallible. So always keep that in mind. And again, we're still going back to that whole thing of asking, why is a person remembering something as they are remembering it? Why does that person have that perception of something? Okay? All right, so before you do an interview, you should always ask yourself questions. You should lay the groundwork, and by that I mean you need to do a little bit of research so that you don't go in there just cold turkey and kind of make the person feel like you're wasting their time because you haven't brought anything to the table with you. You need to bring up questions, construct questions. You need to make sure you understand how your equipment works. And you need to decide what's the best place. Usually the person you're interviewing decides where's the best place for them, where they feel most comfortable. So, you know, that kind of gets out of your hands a little bit. Make sure you always identify and introduce yourself. Make sure that you always realize that the machine that is taping the interview is a blind third person. So all that machine can do is hear. So if you're talking about things and they say, oh, it's so long, and they're using their hands to do it, you need to, you know, reiterate, oh, is that 12 inches? You know, that sort of thing. All right. You need to phrase your questions carefully. And by that, I mean, don't ask yes or no questions. Ask questions that evoke an answer. And draw out gently. You need to build up a rapport with the person first, especially if you don't know them. Listen well so that you can ask follow-up questions. You know, it's nice to have questions in front of you, but you don't want to go right down that list if there is a follow-up question that comes to your mind when they're talking about a certain topic or whatever. And conclude respectfully. Thank the person for their time, that sort of thing. You'll always want to make sure you process your interview, and what I mean by that is transcribe it. There are easier ways of transcribing now as we've gotten more into the digital age, but it's better that you transcribe the interview than someone else, because you were there, you know what was being talked about. Obtain releases, and I've given you things for release forms, and you're not going to do a formal interview for this necessarily. I mean, you could if you wanted to, but for this class, you know, I understand. I mean, oral history is a class in and of itself. So make sure you always obtain releases. You index it if you want to. You copy and distribute it. You know, you might want to deposit it in a library or something like that for other people to use. And then if you're going to use it in a project, you want to make sure that you evaluate it and use when you're using the resource. A lot of people, there are machines out there. There's probably some of the best digital quality tape recorders out there are made by a company called Marantz, M-A-R-A-N-T-Z. And if you have $500 floating around with nothing better to do, you could go out and buy yourself one of those machines. But we don't have that kind of money. So you should go check out Audacity. If you have a laptop, Audacity could do a lot for you. So that's why I put this information up here. There's some stuff about transcribing. I'm not going to go into all the details of that because, again, that's part of an oral history course. But there are some digital transcription programs out there. It doesn't mean that it transcribes it for you. It just means that it turns your keyboard into a transcription machine. And what a transcription machine does is it allows you to go backwards and forwards with just the touch of a button. You know, you don't have to go back and search things of that sort. Um, you could use voice recognition, but voice recognition is not as simple as it seems because you have to train the machine. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes through. And if you ever want to see how bad voice recognition can be, upload something of yourself onto YouTube and turn on the transcription or the closed captioning on YouTube, and you can see how messed up things can get. All right, I think that was, yeah, here's the thing for release forms if you do go out and want to do a really formal interview. And I've also put up some helpful websites here too. So I hope this gives you a little bit of a sense of oral history and you know, some of the problems with it, things of that sort. I've put some stuff up. I think I put up transcription as part of your homework to look through and have you tell me what you think's wrong with it, and what you think you can also gain out of it. But anyway, if you have any questions, just let me know. And thanks for listening.